So I'm going to talk to you about protecting yourself and your company. But why am I talking specifically about cybersecurity? Well, privacy and cybersecurity are two separate subjects. Does anybody think they're separate subjects, or does anybody think they've merged together? Yeah, because I think they're merging together. I think these two things are intrinsically linked. However, there are some differences. So does anybody in the room, you're all entrepreneurs and all CEOs and ever, how many of you had over 50% growth between 2017 and 2018? One or two of you? 75% growth? 90% growth, anyone? Yeah. The cyber crime in this country went from $1.4 billion in 2017 to $2.7 billion in 2018. So somebody's making a huge revenue increase. Yeah. Maybe we're in the wrong business. Yeah. Don't switch, obviously. Yeah. It's a bad idea. But there is a huge industry behind cyber crime. And that's the importance of the number. This is a business. This is no longer a disruption. It's no longer activists. It's people stealing money. So has anybody in this room been part of a data breach? Okay, maybe about a third of you put your hands up, because the rest of you also put your hands up if I say if you've been part of a data breach, because I can virtually guarantee everybody in this room, your data is somewhere on the dark web. Yeah. At some time, your data will have been breached. Yeah, because there are so many data breaches, you just probably don't know. If you look at some of those data breaches, how many of you have a Starwood account? Now, I'm hoping that's the same people that put their hand up just a moment ago. If anybody didn't put their hand up just a moment ago, that's 500 million people had their data stolen through the Starwood system. Yeah. Now, this fine was a European fine. So, and we're going to come back to some of the legislation in a moment. $123 million it cost Marriott Group. 500 million users were actually stolen. Not only did the cyber criminal take the data, they also took the decryption tools. Yeah? So they took the decryption tools from Marriott's network so they could decrypt the data. Yeah? So it's a very sophisticated attack. It's believed it may be a nation state. There's conspiracy theories that somebody wanted to know where diplomats were staying and politicians were staying because they've all got Starwood accounts, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of conspiracy theories about this particular one. At the time I wrote this presentation, this had cost not only Marriott Group $123 million in fines, it had cost them $44 million in infrastructure costs internally. So this is a hugely expensive issue if you have a cyber attack. I'm not going to say too much about this one. Was anybody surprised by Cambridge Analytica? Do you know what's really shocking is we all knew it was going on, and we allowed it, everybody just sat there and allowed it to go on. And then when it happened, I think most of us that are kind of in that area turned and said, well, yeah, that's what we expected to happen. Yeah. Do I think that's the only company doing it? No. Do I think as we head into next year, are we going to see some other companies doing it, targeting the 2020 elections? Is it going on in the UK elections at the moment? Of course it is. There's targeted advertising going on. So this was, interestingly, the day that Facebook paid this fine or agreed to pay this fine or it was announced, their stock price went up. Yeah. So maybe the market thought this fine was going to be bigger. Or the oversight that was agreed with the FTC. So the privacy oversight that is now on Facebook's practice wasn't as stringent as the market thought it would be. So it's still giving them lots of opportunity to do the advertising. So it's an interesting case. And lastly, British Airways, so you can hear by my accent, I'm passionate about this one. Yeah, $230 million fine. Now, interestingly, this was only 500,000 users. So how's the difference between the Marriott Starwood Group and British Airways so big? The fine is an extra $100 million. Yeah. Yet it affected less people, and that's because their practices were found to be bad. So the regulators in Europe turned around and said, you don't have good security practice, you're not doing the right things, therefore the fine's going to be bigger. $230 million. And by the way, that was an injection on their website. So the injection was when you went to the checkout, it was actually doing a redirect and your data was being captured by the cyber criminals. So a very sophisticated attack. How many of you have online businesses? Yeah. How many of you have the latest versions of code installed on your website? Yeah, but you will have tomorrow. Yeah, I hope you will. So this is I said this was a very personal one. This is actually a very personal issue. So a cybersecurity person standing on this stage, we never hear about the victim. You might know that you're part of a data breach. You might get that letter. Somebody might say you can have identity protection. You might get an after-the-fact notification. But you never hear about what actually a cyber criminal does to a victim. So I have, this particular breach was in August of last year. I have a strange bank account. When we moved to the US, I put $10,000 in an offshore bank account, and on our passports, you'll find a debit card. The $10,000 is a get out of jail free card. So wherever you are in the world, there's $10,000 on this card for medical expenses, to get you out of a country, whatever it's for. It's an emergency account. I never use it. I used it once in 2018 to buy my son an airline ticket because he called me and said, and it was the only card I had on me. Yeah, December of last year, cybercriminal made 43 transactions on that account because I'd used the card on the British Airways website while that code injection was in place. So I was one of the 500,000. 43 transactions, they purchased, the first thing they purchased was a VPN. Yeah, so they couldn't be traced. Very amusing. The next 42 transactions were insurance policies. So why would a cyber criminal buy an insurance policy? Very confusing, isn't it? Well, what they did was they purchased the insurance policies and then canceled the insurance policies. The cooling off period in the insurance regulations in Europe allow you to cash in the policy within 14 days. So you can actually turn and say, I decided not to have the insurance. And what you do is you get the refund back to a different card because you tell the insurance company, I no longer have that payment card, you need to refund to a different card. The cyber criminal was actually laundering the cash through my bank account. Yeah, back into cash. Now the bank were really good. When I phoned the bank, I turned around and said, hey, you know, now bear in mind, you know, that I'm a paper person, so I still get paper bank statements, which sounds a bit old-fashioned, I know. Yeah, the statement turned up, used to be one page. The statement turned up, it was like a book. So I rang the bank and turned and said, they said, well, didn't you notice? I said, well, look at the history on the account. I never use this account, so why would I notice? So this was 2 months later. Anyway, the bank refunded the money. The moral of this story from that perspective is if you have a mortgage or you're paying the bank interest, you're paying for the fraud because the bank never get this back. They write it off. $7,500 went back in my bank account immediately. Yeah, and I had to sign some statements, and the rest of the story kind of goes from there. My point here is we never hear about the victim, and we assume the victim is somebody else. I work in this industry, yeah, and I was the victim. And did I do anything wrong? Could I have done anything differently? No, I actually don't. There's nothing I could have done. Yeah. So this is an issue that could and does affect all of us. And at some stage, I think, yeah, my son's 19. At some stage, he will have this affect him. He will be part of a data breach. He will lose his identity to somebody. He will have money taken out of his bank account. I think that's part of modern society. Yeah. So it's a challenge. I also then undertook a project. Anybody ever had a disgruntled employee? More to the point, has anybody ever been a disgruntled employee? Yeah. I then undertook a project for a different presentation. And I'm mentioning this because it's kind of interesting. I wonder whether I could become the cyber criminal. Yeah, if I had no knowledge. So I got myself a blank laptop, sat down, and I thought, could I acquire malware? Could I be the employee that walks into the office tomorrow and installs malware on the company's network? And I gave myself a challenge of doing this within an hour. And like I say, I ditched everything I know, blank laptop, went to the internet, and I Googled. I Googled ransomware. Could I buy ransomware? Sure enough, I could buy ransomware. Not only could I buy ransomware, I could buy unique ransomware with unique decryptors. I could buy a service. Anybody use Google Analytics or something similar to, yeah, it came with full dashboard. It told me where in the purchase process. It had everything in it. I mean, it was a complete service. It had support contracts. Now, you'd assume this would be quite expensive. It was $90 for 3 months, a 3-month contract. Yeah. I needed a payment method. Hey, cryptocurrency. Any Bitcoin fans in the room? Yeah, we should talk afterwards. But cryptocurrency, get an account, and then go off and buy some data. The very data that those cyber criminals are buying from data breaches. At the moment, if you go onto the dark web, 100,000 users, validated email addresses will cost you about $9. Yeah? So you can buy lots and lots of email addresses. And you can distribute software this way. So there's a big challenge here. So there are some things you should do. Now, I'm not going to talk about these things because there's going to be a video of this. You can look at these afterwards. The one thing I would suggest you all do is make sure you've protected your mobile phone, yeah, which is not on this list. Yeah? Protect your mobile phone because it's your authenticator. You use it for the SMS messages. You use it to validate yourself to virtually every service you use today. And it's used to reset nearly every account you have. Your email account, your bank account. You think about it. Everything goes through this one device. Make sure you protect your mobile phone and make sure your mobile phone is protected with your carrier. So there is an issue of SIM swapping. Yeah, and I actually tested this recently. I walked into an AT&T store with my ID partially covered. Yeah, so it could have not been a proper ID. It could have been a fraudulent ID card. And I got a SIM replacement for my own phone. I could have walked in and got anybody's phone. All I needed was a partial ID, socially engineer the guy. Oh, my phone stopped working. I need a new SIM. I've lost my phone. I need a new SIM card. Can you reissue the SIM? Your phone gets turned off. The cybercriminal has your phone. Your phone is your authenticator. Make sure your phone is protected in the right way. Privacy legislation is coming. There's GDPR. I'm going to put up the next screen as well in the interest of time. GDPR, did anybody do anything for GDPR? Did a few of you, yeah, a few of you? CCPA? Is everybody doing something for CCPA? Yeah. Now, CCPA is California's GDPR. There are some subtle differences between the two. GDPR, from a consumer's perspective, is opt-in. CCPA is disclosure that you're already defaulted in. So it's opt-out. So there are some subtle differences. The huge difference between these two, you saw the British Airways and Marriott one. They were regulatory fines. Yeah? California, I think, is going to be different. Now, you'll sit there and think, oh, I'm a small business, I'm a medium business. Yeah, if you've got 50,000 records of California residents on your systems, you need to comply. So let me put that a different way. If you're collecting unique visitor data from your website, that's 137 people a day. So it's not many. Or if you have 200 employees with 250 records on their mobile phones, so contact data, that's also 50,000 people. It doesn't need to be in a database. It's 50,000 personal information records. So you may need to comply, or you should certainly think about complying. The difference here, though, is the Privacy Act here, while there is a state fine of $7,500, this gets put in the hands of lawyers, and they're the worst. Is there any lawyers in the room? I should have checked first, shouldn't I? They're the worst, because you'll have lawyers looking for the data breach, and the minute there is a data breach, they will start a class action lawsuit. And that class action lawsuit is under CCPA regulation, $700 per instant. Now, if you take it that you've got 50,000 records of California citizens, that's a lot of money. That's a hell of a lot of money. Yeah? So be cautious of this. You need to prepare for it. And privacy legislation is around the globe. Yeah. So as you can see here, this is becoming a generation thing. Yeah. We're seeing it crop up everywhere. I asked somebody from the European Commission recently, what happens to a Chilean citizen living in California who travels to Europe? Which legislation are they covered by? And he went, I have no clue. And he was one of the privacy lawyers in Europe. So this is a very complex field. Yeah? My advice is to prepare for it, is to actually, as any business, small business or large business, is actually put yourself in a position where you are compliant or you're doing the right things. So the word reasonable security is in the California legislation. So what do they mean by reasonable security? Well, it doesn't actually define it. There is no definition. I'm sure we will see that at some stage through when it comes, when the first cases come to court. But there should be an assessment. You should look for the gap analysis, where you are. Do you know where all your data is? That's one of the most important things most businesses don't know. Do you know who's got access to your data in the organization? And do you know what you're holding? And why? Why are you holding it? Are you holding it for legitimate purposes? Or should you be getting rid of it? Have a compliance roadmap. Have an implementation plan. So I'm conscious of my time here, so I'm going to quickly go through. Have somebody responsible in your organization, regardless of how big your business is, have somebody who is the data protection officer. This is not a requirement under CCPA, it's actually a requirement under GDPR. I think this is a fantastic thing, even if they're not a specialist. Have somebody, your IT guy, security guy, whoever it is in the organization, who you can point to and turn and say, this is the person responsible for our data privacy. This person can monitor employee training, awareness. They can make sure that you know where the data is. Encrypt data. I often get asked one question by a lot of companies, what should I encrypt? Everything. Just encrypt everything. Yeah? Encrypt your data, encrypt your devices. I'd ask the question of who doesn't have full disk encryption on their laptops, but that might be a bit too technical. But go home and make sure go to work and make sure you've got the encryption turned on, and use multi-factor authentication. Update software and firmware, and I'm conscious I'm out of time, but there's the one thing I'm going to say here. How many people update their software on a frequent basis? Yeah, I was going to say you all do. Right, let's give you a different challenge. How many of you have an infotainment system in your car? Most of you do. How many of you connect your phone? How many of you update the infotainment system in your car? Take it to a dealer. Thank you, sir. You're the only one that put your hand up then. Yeah? Take it to your dealer and ask them to update it. And they go, I have no clue. Yeah? Your car has an internet connection and it has all your contacts. Yeah? So make sure you update your car too. I'm just pointing out that the devices you least expect that need updating are the very ones that you should update, because they're the ones that get forgotten. We all know to update our laptops, the webcam, yeah, the car, all those other things. Make sure you're updating those. So have an action plan. That's the one thing I can leave you with, is have that action plan. As a business, have an action plan for cybersecurity. Engage in it. Make sure your business is secure by design. Not only your products and services you deliver to the customer, but the actual services you run internally. Always think of security first. So with that, thank you.